Hi, I'm George Page for Nature, and today we begin a series of 3 films set in the country of Botswana in southern Africa. Much of Botswana is part of the Great Kalahari Desert, 100,000 square miles where rain falls only rarely. The first European to cross the Kalahari was David Livingstone in 1849. He'd been warned by the local chief against trying the journey, and the warnings were indeed justified. But Dr. Livingstone was fired by much more than just a wish to conquer the awesome wilderness of the Kalahari. He'd heard tantalizing stories of a great inland lake far across the desert. What he eventually discovered was an enormous wetland, a place the locals called the Land of Many Rivers. We now know this area to be the delta of the Okavango River, an island of water surrounded by a sea of sand, a magnet to the great herds of African wildlife, a jewel in the midst of the Great Kalahari Desert. Once, in this thirst land of the Kalahari, there lay a fresh inland sea, a lake called Magadi, among the largest that Africa has ever known. Now salt and sand bake in the sun where it vanished long ago. But the same forces which caused it to disappear into the stifling heat created a new singular jewel of fresh water, a rich oasis of wildlife that lies beyond this bleak horizon. It's a precious gift of nature that even from afar draws life over these desolate plains. It's here at the edge of the ancient lake that our search for the jewel begins. Here, moonlight once glistened on that ancient lake. Now it highlights the cautious emergence of the Kalahari's nightlife. Year-round residents which survive the worst trials of this waterless expanse by surfacing only after the punishing sun has set. The slightest scufflings of a scorpion are music to a bat-eared fox, but it always pays to be wary when danger lurks nearby. It's small enough to fall victim to larger predators of the Kalahari. It preys on a diet of insects, mostly termites. Though it lives in social groups, it always hunts alone. Those remarkable ears pinpoint the prey. It's troublesome, but satisfies both hunger and thirst. Only the stinging tail will be flicked away. The night eyes of bush babies are their greatest asset, helping their daring agility at leaping. Slender, padded fingers give a good grip on the bark and on the insects they pursue. Its prey also provides the moisture it needs to survive this dry season. They're related to monkeys, and like monkeys, often carelessly shower bits of food to the ground. The leftover moth won't be there for long. To the pygmy mouse, it's manna from heaven, an almost overwhelming meal for this smallest of mammals in the Kalahari. The gerbils are out too, risking the moonlight to feed on the sparsely scattered roots and grasses. And the barn owl watches mainly for gerbils. Home for the barn owl is inside a giant baobab tree. Inside, the family huddles for warmth, awaiting the next meal. The female has been watching over them, and now she takes her turn to hunt in the few cold hours of night that remain. The returning sun will banish animals to their burrows around the salt pans, the legacy of that great lake called Magadi-Hati. The searing heat of the dry season's day highlights a paradox, where life now exists at the limits of survival. Once lay an inland sea of fresh water. Today, ridges of grass mark the ghost of its shores. Most of the flat, landlocked Republic of Botswana is covered by the sands of the Kalahari, and it was the northern half that once lay under that super lake, into which drained great rivers from distant islands, among them the Okavango. Then enormous earth movements which formed Africa's Great Rift Valley fractured the crust of the earth in several places. These faults changed the courses of the rivers which fed the lake. The Chobe was diverted to the east, bypassing the lake. This, along with an increasingly arid climate, meant less water flowing into the Great Lake, and it began to evaporate. At first, the Okavango continued to feed the dwindling lake, as the river took a tortuous path to the Indian Ocean. Then the faults raised a natural dam across its path, forming a huge inland delta. The Great Lake vanished, leaving behind the largest salt pans in the world. Now the stage was set for an extraordinary African pageant, which begins far to the north, along the banks of the Chobe. During the dry season, elephants, like all creatures that depend on open water for their survival, stay near these permanent watercourses. But as the time for the first rains approaches, these herds begin to abandon what appears to be a secure haven. They know they must move on to survive, though some are not always as ready to leave as others. few need to be coaxed out of their aquatic playground. The lush river courses have supported great numbers of wildlife during the dry season. But by its end, with so many hungry mouths to feed, the riverside is overgrazed, and what's left is not nutritious enough to support them. The grasses and bushes need time to recover their growth. The restlessness seems infectious. Buffalo are also beginning to move south. Their exodus gathers momentum. Heeding the wisdom of many generations, they move to the interior of the Kalahari, following the promise of rain. It's as though they know the desert is about to offer succulent new pastures. But they have far to go, and not all will escape the tawny death which lays in wait for their passing. Coming late to the scene, as usual, the pride male rubs his scent on the body. It's his way of laying easy claim to the buffalo his mates have worked hard to kill. It could be that the smell of distant rain triggers the desire for new pastures even before clouds appear. There were times when such journeys were not necessary, when the Kalahari was a wetter and greener place. But as the climate changed over thousands of years, the animals were forced into this great trek. Leaving the northern rivers, the elephants enter vast woodlands which border the Kalahari sands. Under the mopani trees, they'll find food and shade. With good luck, the depressions they've created by digging and wallowing in the clay soil may still hold a little water, and they'll fill again soon when the rains come. The elephants don't wander as far south as the salt pans at Magadihadi. They find sufficient food in this cathedral-like canopy. Even from the dry leaves, they gain twice as much protein as they get from the grasses along the riverbank. And when the rains come, new leaves will appear. But those animals that feed on grass must travel deeper into the heart of the Kalahari. The sight of distant scattered storms leads the migrating herds on. In this flat country, it may take several days to reach the clouds on the horizon, but the prospect of tender green grass and fresh water beckons. But even much farther south, the rains are still only a distant promise. The salt pans are as desolate as ever, but there are antelopes here that can tolerate such dryness. Springbok. Is it a predator or the hint of rain in the air that sets them to pronking? This ritualized leaping stirs excitement through the herd. The dust is washed away from the air. The ground is alive with sudden streams. This place of sand becomes a water bowl. Now the migration from permanent water to the heart of the thirstlands begins to make sense. The other face of the Kalahari is beginning to show, as it does each summer. There is a natural rhythm to which the movements of wildebeest, zebra, buffalo, and elephant have become attuned. Already, the magic of moisture is working. From the newly formed pools, life is re-emerging. The eyes of the African mud turtle have never seen the dry landscape from which they've hidden, cocooned within the earth for months, even years. They'll not have their pool to themselves for long. At the end of their long trek, the nomadic herds converge here from the fringes of the Kalahari. Thirsty wildebeest are the first to enter the water. The more cautious zebras take their time. The resident springboks also maintain their wariness, congregating in the heart of this seasonal luxuriance of grasses. Suddenly, what had been an apparent desert is flushed with enough growth to feed thousands of animals. The new grasses are enriched by minerals the wind has carried here from the nearby salt pans during the dry season. Elephants no longer migrate this far, but those giant palms suggest that once they did, perhaps when there was still permanent water here. They're the only animals with a slow enough digestive system to have carried the seeds of palm fruit in their stomachs all the way from the rivers of the north. Times of abundance mean it's the moment to give birth. To survive, the calf must stand up and run within half an hour. Remarkably, most of the females in this herd will calve within the same month. Each calf will be just as vulnerable. The predators will take some, But with so many young available at once, each individual has a greater chance of surviving. As in the migration itself, timing is everything. For a short time, as long as the scattered pools survive, the herd's wanderings cease. The new grasses hold the grazers like a magnet, and under their noses, many other mouths are at work. Harvester termites reap the dead grasses left over from winter, as well as the new growth. Life above ground here is one of extremes. So the termites build their nests deep in the ground where the temperature and humidity are controlled. And that's where they'll drag these cumbersome clippings. Down below, worker termites will half digest the grasses and feed that preparation to the rest of the colony. Out of sight, an extensive underground factory is at work, processing these grasslands into termites, a living larder readily plundered by the Kalahari's other permanent residents. Spiny agamas have little need for rain. They get all the water they require from the juicy termites they eat. They'll take them even when they're half asleep. Sand lizards like them too. For a juvenile sand lizard, a termite is more than a mouthful. And it's no coincidence that this young lizard looks like this beetle. It's a ground beetle which boldly hunts termites. These beetles have successfully caught insects on the ground for so long that they're no longer able to fly. They have powerful jaws to catch and hold their prey. Occasionally, they're used for a little piracy. A toad on the lookout for passing insects is in for a surprise when this ground beetle happens along. Formic acid released by the beetle is not at all tasty to the toad. So effective is its defense that it's a beetle worth copying. The juvenile sand lizard has not only acquired matching colors, but mimics the beetle's walk. The result, a beetle impersonator. The sand lizard enjoys a degree of immunity from attack with its arched back and unlizardly gait. This strategy works only for the beetle-sized young. When fully grown, it must trust its life to a more discreet camouflage. The immense salty depressions of the Magadi are still part of a vast inland system of channels, draining water from the surrounding Kalahari. In the dry season, the rivers appear to be filled only with sand, but they flow with water once more if the rains are heavy. Where the ancient lake died, a shallow ghost of its former glory is resurrected, and thousands of flamingos come seeking these ephemeral waters. The timing of their arrival seems almost magical, but these shallow salt waters, already shrinking in the glare of the sun, have come alive with tiny animals. They're brine shrimp, and they've been here all the time. They can survive for years as dried eggs held in the sun-baked mud of the salt pans, until this flush of water triggers them to hatch. The adults begin to produce eggs almost immediately. The females must lay them in the soft mud before this gigantic puddle is sucked dry by the sun. Grains of life in the sand. The eggs are among the hardiest of organisms, lying in wait for future rains. But while the salty waters remain, these greater flamingos will feed on the brine shrimp. They pump water through their upside-down beaks and filter out the abundance of crustaceans. Others have been drawn to this rich broth: black-winged stilts, blacksmith plovers, and avocets. Some of these birds have traveled great distances to reap this bounty. They're part of a huge chain of life that links wetlands half a world away with this temporary paradise. In this brief season of plenty, the steadfast residents of the Magadi Hadi are busier than ever on summer nights. A pouched mouse faces a new problem. Usually, the seeds it eats can be stuffed into its cheeks and carried to the safety of its burrow. But this palm fruit is too big to carry away, and the mouse must risk its life by feeding in the open. The spring hare is no danger, only competition. This kangaroo-like rodent also likes the ginger-flavored palm fruits. The largest of African rodents, its size enables it to travel widely enough to survive on the sparse grass of the dry season. Unfortunately, it's also just the right size to be at the top of every predator's menu. And there's real danger here. The anthill tiger may seem too dramatic a name for what appears to be a harmless domestic cat with a home in a termite mound. But while the black-footed cat may be the smallest of Africa's felines, it's tough and hunts here all year round. The pouched mouse, a favorite food, has delayed too long at its meal. It kills quickly with canine teeth that are unusually long for so small an animal. And even an anthill tiger, in typical cat fashion, rounds off its evening meal with a cat lick. Months later, a day finally arrives when the rains are a distant memory, and the Kalahari sun has blotted up the smaller pools and again dried the pans into salt. A day when the nomads must move on or die. Perhaps they take their cue from the dust in the wind, or the vanishing of the pools, or from some inner rhythm established through generations of wandering in the quest of fresh grass and fresh water. The hot air teases the eye with mirages. The nomads have left. Only the wind moves in their wake, covering their tracks. High in a palm tree, the only tree to rise above the salt pans, a pair of white-backed vultures has chosen this time to raise their chick. The parents take turns guarding the youngster. One adult is usually out scavenging across the plains. The pickings can be good in the wake of the migrating herds. For the vultures, this is their time of plenty. They have keen eyesight and can range over vast distances by circling on hot updrafts of air rising from the sun-baked land. The slow march of the zebras northward over these drying plains will take them 6 to 8 weeks and hundreds of miles to what seems an unlikely destination. The Bateti, now only a dry riverbed. Somehow the herds know that soon, at the height of the dry season, miraculously, it will flow again. Ostriches are here all year round. Now they're busy producing the next generation. A male ostrich booms his romantic overture to a receptive female. She hints at her willingness to submit with drooping wings and shivering feathers. He watches her for a while before completing the courtship with a spectacular mating dance of his own. Apparently, he's now thoroughly irresistible. Mating is accompanied by plenty of bill clacking. Crowned plovers are also breeding here along the dry riverbank. She's laid a speckled egg in a simple nest, almost invisible in the sand. The intense heat of these parched days is no trouble to the female ostrich. She ruffles her feathers to keep cool by letting the air carry heat away from her skin while she takes her turn at incubating her eggs. Ostriches are unusual because other females will lay eggs in this nest, although only this pair will incubate the growing number of eggs. The approach of another female intent on laying her eggs in the nest is greeted by a good deal of bill clacking by the owners. It's a ritual now, perhaps all that remains of the aggressive response that the owners might once have shown. It's thought that nesting communally has arisen partly as a result of the polygamous mating habits of the ostrich. Certainly, the female is perfectly capable of incubating more than her own 6 or 7 eggs. But why would she help raise the young of other unrelated females? There are some advantages, however, to being the female in charge of the nest. When an egg is laid, it is carefully arranged. But the resident female can sort out her eggs from these new ones, and she'll put hers in the center, where they're less likely to be stolen by jackals or hyenas. The male takes over the nest at dusk. Before he settles, he also checks the arrangement of the eggs. He'll sit all night, his dark plumage effective camouflage. For the ostriches, the loss of 1 or 2 eggs would not be a disaster, but this crowned plover has laid only 1. For its own defense, this snake mimics the markings of the poisonous night adder. But the egg-eater snake has no venom. It doesn't need any, for true to its name, it eats only eggs. Its flicking tongue provides it with an acute sense of smell, which not only leads it to an egg, but can tell whether the egg is fresh or spoiled. In order to consume this immense meal, it must unhinge its jaws. The grotesque mouthful will be punctured by bony projections at the back of the throat, for this snake does not have fangs. The contents of the egg will be squeezed along to the stomach, while the fragments of shell are neatly regurgitated. All that remains is for the egg-eater snake to realign its jaws. The migration has gathered momentum. A new urgency drives the herds through a land that offers no relief. The drying Kalahari closes a door behind them. Their only hope is to reach water in time. This first journey is a terrible trial for the foals born this year by the shores of the now distant Makgadikgadi. The desperate need for food and water that seems forever out of reach can break even the strong social bonds between members of the zebra harem. Even the very closest bonds between a mother and her foal can be undone. Without its mother to guide and coax it on, a foal is truly lost. The route to survival is littered with the corpses of the fallen. Ironically, the lives of others depend on this. A horde of scavengers drops from the sky within minutes. They have their own young to feed. So often, life and death stumble hand in hand in Africa. The tragedies offset by miracles. Glistening like a jewel, the landlocked delta of the Okavango receives the miracle of a flood in the midst of the dry season. Its waters will meet the exhausted herds along the banks of the Boteti, which carries the delta's overflow. Draining from the highlands of Angola some 300 miles to the north, the rains of last summer arrived just in time to relieve the drought of the Kalahari winter. Somehow, the nomadic herds always anticipate its arrival, but the water will never swell high enough to fill this ancient course. Its banks were cut during a time when the climate was wetter, and this river fed the long-extinct giant lake, Makgadikgadi. Parched mouths reach for the flood. It's the end of the journey and a new beginning. Only the fittest of the young zebra foals have survived the test, and most will face this marathon again, perhaps knowing next time that the miracle does happen. Farther north, the elephants are gripped by the same seasonal drama. The mopani trees have shed their leaves. These giants have been sustained by the woodlands and its water holes for several months. But now they must seek permanent waters again, perhaps following the scent of moisture in the air. It might be the same wind that's caught the nostrils of the buffaloes and turned their heads toward the distant flood. This traditional trek across the Kalahari is among the last of several great migrations that evolved in Africa. The key to its existence is this precious gift of nature, the Okavango. This largest and most beautiful oasis in Africa is an accident of nature, as was the gigantic lake that it once fed. Magadi Hadi melted away, but the Okavango flourished to become both a refuge and a home. The buffaloes, elephants, zebras, and wildebeests will turn again as new rains call them back to the interior. But the Okavango will remain the jewel of the Kalahari. Join us next time as we travel deep into the Okavango Delta and explore the fascinating collection of wildlife this wetland supports in the midst of a great desert. I'm George Page for Nature.
Karen Ross has written a companion book to this program, Okavango, Jewel of the Kalahari. It is available in bookstores and libraries. Bye.